Hello, Catherine. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Thank you so much for being on my show, Engineer Her Path. And I'm so glad that I'll get into the story of how we met also. But yeah, this is Catherine Hurley. We met, oh geez, it was last year. It was last year. The year's flown
October.
by. Yeah, October at the National SWE 24 conference in Chicago, nearby where you live.
Yep. Backyard. Just drove down.
Yeah. And I think we sat like almost in the front row of, I can't remember which talk. And we just like hit it off and
Yep.
we've kept in contact ever since. And you also have a very active LinkedIn presence and you're in the sustainability world. And we're going to talk about that today, but I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks, Sandra. Thanks for having me. I'm Catherine Hurley. I'm a sustainability leader, champion, enthusiast, as you would say. And I did meet you at the SWE conference because my background is in civil and environmental engineering. And I actually love going to the front row because when I was first studying engineering, Calculus 1, I sat in the back with like my roommates and I was doing horrible because I didn't realize that everyone else had already taken calculus and it was my first time. And no one was asking questions. And I didn't want to ask a question and have everyone like look at me and be like, who is this chick asking questions? So I got a D in calculus. And I vowed from then on to sit in the front row because that way I could ask a question. And if no one was looking at me because they're all behind me and it's just me and the professor. So I'm a front row, first thing of no matter where I go, I sit in the front.
That story, I've never thought about that perspective because I'm that type of person. I like to ask a lot of questions in class too. Yeah. And when I was in college, I was that person who always asked the professor a lot of questions also.
Yeah. And then you don't have to worry about people looking at you. So I went in that conference. I just got there and I'm like, I'm going to sit by the front. And you looked friendly. I sat down next to you. We started chatting and we were just like meant to be friends. So glad to be here.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think you've also been in engineering about the same time as me, over 2 decades.
Yeah. Yeah. Now
around
I
the
feel
same
like
time.
I'm feeling a little experienced. I'm not early career.
Isn't
anymore.
it crazy? Because, I guess I don't know if we're mid-career or late career. I have no idea. I don't know what 20 years is.
Well, usually engineers work a really long time. So I'm going to go with mid-career, but senior professional. Because there's still a lot to go, but I feel more senior. I don't feel junior, but we still have a lot of horizon, I guess you could say.
Yeah, that's true. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about your career journey. And I remember you also had that awesome story about how you launched your career from a SWE conference initially, too.
Yeah, so this was like 20-something year anniversary of going to SWE. I went with a group from my college. I studied civil and environmental engineering. And back then, you couldn't study sustainability. It was literally not a word in the vernacular. So I was like, I'm going to go into consulting. And I went to the SWE career fair and I got a on-the-spot interview. And then I actually came home for Thanksgiving and didn't have my suit. And I got called for an interview. So I had to wear my mom's suit. It was real old school. It was like long skirt. Did the interview. It was great. And so I started out in civil and environmental engineering consulting. And I was doing like water modeling and storm sewer analysis to make sure people weren't getting basements flooded. And I really enjoyed that. But then at that same time, people started talking about, caring for the environment and sustainability started to become a thing. And so one of my clients, City of Evanston, was hiring a sustainability coordinator. And I thought that would be fun. So I just randomly applied for it thinking like, that could be interesting. And then I got the job. And that was 15 years ago.
Wow. So did it really come into the vernacular and everything about 15 years ago?
Yeah, like I would say late 2000s, because I think I changed jobs in about 2008. So like maybe 2005, 6, like in Chicago, the Department of Environment, Mayor Daley had this Department of Environment in Chicago, and they started the green roof movement and a lot of sustainability things, but they weren't quite calling it sustainability until about 2005-ish timeframe, 2008. And so they were maybe only 20 or so sustainability coordinators in cities and counties in 2008. And now there's like hundreds, like every city around America is like starting to hire sustainability people. So I've seen this huge growth of sustainability as a profession and as a career.
Wow. And for those that don't know much about it, can you just define it a little bit?
Yeah. So sustainability is really, in my mind, like a long-term aspirational goal. Like how can we survive as a species in a way that allows our generation to meet their needs, but also doesn't prohibit 2 or 3 or 7 generations ahead to also still thrive, which means we need to think about people and their livelihood. We need to think about the environment and sort of how much natural resource there is. And then we also need to think about kind of the business, the ability for people to support themselves and kind of the human side. So there's like this people, profit, planet. There's all these different like kitschy kind of acronyms you can use. But really, it's about creating a balance. And so everyone can thrive, including the environment and animals and kind of the natural as well as people. But because we hadn't maybe been thinking about that for the last, hundreds of years.
Yeah.
To get to a more sustainable environment or kind of ecosystem, we have to make changes to get back in balance because we've not been in so much balance lately. And that's part of why it's hard because you're trying to get people to make changes.
Wow.
Yeah.
And at the like government level sometimes, right?
Yeah. There's all these scales. So like, how can you personally be sustainable? Like there were when I was in Evanston, we had Northwestern University students who were doing like this waste challenge. And they basically were for a whole week carrying around whatever waste they generated.
Interesting.
To become more aware. Because what if you had to keep your waste nearby and you couldn't like send it off in a garbage truck off to a landfill in Wisconsin or Indiana, and you had to be more aware of how much waste you generate? You might generate less, but we've made it so easy to send away your waste or to use as much clean water as you want, and not realizing that there's a finite amount of water, and if the water's not being replenished as we're using it, there won't be fresh water. So we're not in touch with those things. But in order to get to a place where we can sort of support everyone in a more, where we could keep doing it forever, we don't run out of resources, but people can also have their own kind of quality of life, it means that we have to really rethink about how much water and waste and energy and resource we use. And are we degrading the environment to the point where then there's no trees, right, to like absorb carbon dioxide and generate oxygen and all of these things. So there's different scales, and your personal footprint versus like a city versus a business. We've really matured our thinking about all of these complex topics in the last 15 years.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I never thought about some of that stuff.
Yeah.
And is some of it mandated, or is it you're trying to get behavior change or rules put in place? Or
so there's a little bit of both. Some of the historical environmental movement, kind of partly came from people like Rachel Carson, who were really worried about how much pesticides we are spraying on plants and the like toxic negative impacts on people from some of the behaviors we were doing to support society. So some of the early movement came from that kind of like human health, and balance with the environment. There have been other environmentalists like Jimmy Carter, was a really big environmentalist in the sense of like natural preservation, that we should preserve and have natural parks and natural areas that should just be set aside and not developed. So there's kind of like a preservationist kind of stem. And then more recently, there's among all that also the concern that now we've done so much emitting a fossil fuel that we're now causing climate change. And now we have to actually do more action because we're starting to see like a long-term negative impact on the planet from the human behavior. So some things are being regulated, like just not dumping, sewage into the river, or, companies, manufacturing plants can't just like in The Simpsons, dump stuff out into the stream. So there's that regulation. But now that there's also awareness that some of that isn't enough to get in better balance, then we're seeing more regulations, whether it be cities and states are creating their own laws and requirements of how they want things to be conducted, like in the city. And then you also see like state, like in my state, Illinois, they've passed the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act to try to get more commitment to action in the state and cleaning up the electric grid. And then like, national policy that relates to big picture things, at the national level. So there's all these different levels, and it's big businesses and individuals all can make an impact to try to get closer to that vision of being more sustainable.
Oh, true. How much do you feel some of the job is maybe informing and educating other people, or persuading? Because I imagine that is a big part of it too.
Yes. And I get a lot of, oh, well, you're not a typical engineer. Or I used to play a game like, well, sustainability manager, like what background do you think I have? And, when I first started as my first sustainability coordinator, no one thought I was an engineer. They're like, oh, are you in public policy? Are you in education? Because a lot of it is helping to explain the situation, get some sense of urgency, and try to help people want to be motivated to help out, to kind of do their part. So there's a lot of communication, presentations, talking a lot, and in my case, trying to be, kind of passionate and enthusiastic, so people want to be part of the movement rather than seeing it as like a downer.
That's interesting. Do you think maybe it was because you're well spoken, or I sometimes think if you have maybe an empathetic side at work, people are like, oh, you couldn't possibly be an engineer.
I also think yes, and I think there's still the people think in their mind, like if you just said a word and what first comes to your mind. I think when you think engineer, you have a certain image of your mind that isn't a well-spoken, outgoing, kind of warm, bubbly woman, right? And so that's something. In fact, I was early in my career. I was with a colleague, and I was junior then, and we went to a client. They asked us if we were the interns, and I'll never forget. She goes, "Oh no, we're the engineers."
Maybe it's a compliment. You look that young, or I'm not sure.
Maybe, or they just thought we couldn't possibly be the engineers that were sent from this consultancy to work on their project. We just didn't fit we didn't fit the box.
Yeah, I mean, just because I don't know that many people in sustainability engineering, is it just kind of like the other, or like civils, like it's more male dominated, probably?
Well, I think we learned at SWE, many of the engineerings are still mainly male dominated. There's been some progress, but not that much compared to other fields like medicine. So I think that's a factor. And so I think it's just, there's just like an image. And I think that's why we're trying to break down the stereotypes. Like, why do we have a preconceived notion of what the engineer should be? I actually think in sustainability, some people who came from more policy backgrounds, they look at these challenges and like, let's make a law, or let's make a regulation, or let's, kind of infuse something in the government. Because I'm an engineer, I'm always thinking about like infrastructure and an improvement project. Like I think of sustainability first and foremost, and like, well, how can we build a thing or modify a thing or optimize a thing or a process to help it be less of an environmental impact? Because I have an engineering background. So I do look at it often that way, but I got to sell it. I got to have,
Yeah, I could see with that type of niche field, you probably have to have better than average communication skills.
Yes. Yeah. And some companies now, sustainability could be in their corporate communications office. Yeah.
So I know we talked about this a little bit at the conference. It's not always the most traditional linear path, right, for people to get into sustainability. So talk about that, like what type of backgrounds or paths people can take if they were interested, like someone in college right now?
Yeah. So, I mean, I first of all would say any job can be a sustainability job. Every job can be a sustainability job. So like if you're passionate about the topic, you can work whether you're selling real estate or you're, working in a finance organization, or you work in, a city government, any role you have, you can look to reduce the environmental impact, incorporate, how people can make sure that it's financially viable and, kind of support people like in a social perspective. So at any role, that's what I usually tell people. If you don't have a sustainability job and you want one, then figure out in your area how you can contribute to like these huge, big goals. Nowadays, you can start out in a more STEM area. And of course, as a STEM person, I'm going to be encouraging, if you have any inclination to math and science and engineering, to pick that, because those roles are often less people go into them because they require more math and science skills. But you can also go into law. You can go into communications. You can go into public policy. So I think really now in 2025, sustainability is like an all hands on deck. And what we really need is lots of roles in every organization to be figuring out how they can contribute to sustainability, and doing that, not just the people who may have a sustainability title.
Interesting.
Yeah. So but it's not linear. And I started in engineering, and then I went from a consulting into a city, and I was a one gal band. My boss said, you don't have any budget and you don't have any staff, but you have my support and you have the ear of the mayor. So in the city, I focused a lot on passing ordinances and building coalitions with community groups. Whereas in my role now, I'm a sustainability manager in a facility where we have 50 buildings that use a bunch of energy, and we're working to, in many ways, reduce the impact of how much energy and resources we need to do our science mission. So it is more infrastructure. And I do have, budget, and I have people that work for me. So there's like all different combinations as well.
Okay. And what type of backgrounds, like if they were a STEM background, ideally, I'm sure people could move into it, but what would people pursue if that's their main goal when they leave school?
So pretty much every engineering discipline now has sustainability connections. So it's really exciting. So for example, like if you are, in electrical engineering. Electrical engineering is like hot ticket right now because a lot of people are working to electrify equipment to add more clean and renewable energy, which needs a lot of electrical engineering design. We have to figure out how to modernize the grid and have more clean and renewable energy and battery storage be all connected. And our whole grid system was really built with a different kind of asset generation in mind. So electrical engineers can get like a basic electrical engineering background and go into all sorts of cool jobs that are in like a clean energy economy, working on batteries and storage and electric vehicles and charging stations and solar panels. And none of those titles have sustainability in them. But it's almost like we've actually realized how, in a more detailed manner, we need all these different disciplines to work on the end projects that are helping us to be more sustainable. So that's an example. Mechanical, there's, more efficient vehicles. There's wind turbines. There's lots of processes and like big manufacturing that need to be optimized to make the equipment, more efficient. They have to figure out how they can have it run and work differently. And they need mechanical engineers to like redesign how the parts and components work and function to have there be less energy and resource material made.
Oh, that's really cool. Like if they're just drawn to it, they can find the work that would go into that. Okay. I love that.
Yeah. And so many companies now have tons of teams of people with traditional like engineering degrees that are being deployed on all sorts of cool clean energy and sustainability challenges. So you really can find it wherever you go. It's just, kind of the interest, I would say.
Oh, wow. That's cool. Yeah. And the other interesting thing I think about you is you've been in different type of industries from consulting to government and just, it's fascinating to me because I've only been in one industry. So if you could tell us more about, pros and cons or thoughts about different, parts of your career.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say when I started in consulting, I got to work on a lot of really cool projects that, the city had approved and had funded, and then they were hiring us to do a cool project, which is great because the team gets engaged and someone's already done all the legwork to like argue why that should be done and to get budget for it. And so you get to work kind of on the really cool technical project. And I worked on some really cool modeling simulations, kind of digital twins before that word was a thing. Cool. And it was doing digital twins in the early 2000s, showing that we could, instead of building bigger sewer pipes for stormwater and sanitary sewer, we could have more pervious surfaces like grass and bioswales where basically the water would be absorbed into the ground rather than going into a huge pipe that's very expensive. We did these really cool like model simulations. It was really a cool project, but someone else did all the work to like make the business case and get it approved. When I was in the city, we would have to have an idea and then figure out how much it will cost and then get all these people to be on board and then get the community to say yes and then get it budgeted and then hire a consultant and then someone would help start doing the project. So we were sort of seeing it earlier in the life cycle. And then once the thing was built, we had to make sure that it works and is maintained and functions, over the life. So that's kind of the city we would see like a bigger life cycle. And then where I'm at now in the kind of federal Department of Energy National Labs, we have research that gets funded. We're a high energy physics lab. And in order to do the science research, we also have to have heating and cooling and roads and buildings support the science. So I get to make the lab more sustainable, both asking the scientists, like, how could you use less energy, as well as how do we make sure that the conventional or the support buildings are also efficient, right? Because you kind of need like, all of those things. So where I'm at now, we have a lot of federal requirements. So I don't get to like make up like, I think a good goal would be we should reduce our energy by 25% because someone else in the federal sector told you the goal, but they also don't always give you the money to fully achieve the goal. So you're kind of like chasing like a wave, but like you don't have a lot of things you can control, but you're motivated because someone set the goal. Whereas maybe at the city, the community was making up the goals. And so you do community outreach to help figure out, well, what should the goal be? How bold do we want? Do we want to be a leader? Do we want to be a follower? So there was more influence. And in consulting, we just did cool projects to help someone else meet their goals. So it's sort of like
interesting.
Yeah, different points.
You have to project manage more in some scenarios. Yeah.
But really focus on like all the nitty gritty on the really cool stuff that was approved, or that someone else said, yes, you can do that.
Okay. Yeah. What do you think has really helped you in your career? Like the best career advice that you have for someone out there?
Yeah. So I think in sustainability, like trying to be a change agent, but also just as like a manager, because I'm a people leader. And so I have people that
Yes.
report to me. People tend to support that which they help to create. So that means that we really need to get people's engagement, participation. It's not always a democracy. So that doesn't mean that everyone necessarily gets a vote, but I'm really big on participation from whether it be my employees, the broader stakeholders at an organization, and the city was like the community members, because people need to feel like their voices were heard and that they genuinely got to give input that was helped to shape whatever the final solution is. And so that's like my number one thing is that in every role, I got to get input from people, which means talking. Sometimes it means using tools. I'm really big on different digital tools for virtual meetings like Padlet or Mentimeter, where you can like poll people and ask them what they think. In-person meetings, I love Post-it notes where everyone like independently writes down what they think on a Post-it, and then you put all the Post-its like on a big board, and then people can see.
I've never done any of these, so it's anonymous and people get to.
Yes.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Yes, and it helps when you have people in a meeting who are softer spoken or wouldn't like raise their hand. When everyone gets a Post-it note or 2 Post-it notes, they can write their ideas down kind of on their own without being influenced and then put them on the board. I love this method. Yeah, and then you can even dot vote on like the best ideas where everyone gets like 2 dots, and then you put a dot next to the Post-it note that you like the best.
Oh, I like this stuff. So how do you deal with, when someone says, hey, I voiced my opinion, but either you didn't listen to me or you didn't like my idea. I feel like that's where a lot of feelings get hurt at work.
So one thing that I found helps is at the beginning of the process, setting the stage to say, we're going to take all input, and then what's going to happen? Is my deciding as a manager? Is there a small team deciding? Are we going to take the best viable ideas and then everything else will go in a parking lot to be able to be evaluated later? So usually when I explain the rules up front and then I follow through on them, then it works out okay. It's just if you said, we're going to pick the idea that gets the most votes, and then you don't pick that idea, then the wheels fall off. But if you said, we're going to brainstorm all the ideas and then through whatever process, pick what to do moving forward, then it's okay. You just don't want people to be surprised that they thought it was like they could influence the process more than they thought.
No, I think that is really good. When I used to do one-on-ones with people, I would tell people it's open door policy. You can talk about whatever you want. And some people literally took it as maybe like they can convince me, right? But I also told people like I have the final say so, and I'm willing to always hear your input, but maybe what they're saying is not viable, right? So it's just interesting. But you're right. When you set the stage and you're telling people, yes, I'm open to hearing what you have to say, but doesn't mean I have to agree with it or have to implement it, but I'm always willing to hear what you have to say, right?
Yeah. I would call that, sometimes I would just call it setting the table. Like maybe I wasn't going to be deciding at all, but I'm coming and I'm convening a bunch of people, and they're going to then talk about it and they're going to decide, and I'm just providing the space where everyone can come together equally and to collaborate. Sometimes that I wouldn't even be the decision maker. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, tell us a little bit about your leadership journey throughout your career. Because I don't know if there's a lead type of equivalent, or did you go straight to manager? And
yeah, so I kind of did like a peak in a valley, and then a peak and then a valley, because when I was in consulting, I was like an individual contributor, like associate engineer, and then senior engineer, and then I was a team leader, and I had 5 or 6 people that reported to me.
Okay,
and I was doing career development and timesheets, and I direct time requirements for my team. And then when I went to the city sustainability, I went back down to like no direct reports. And then I hired a fellow, but for a while I didn't have anybody. And then when I went to my next sustainability job, that job had like 2 or 3 people that reported to me. So then and I think sometimes people are worried that if they change roles and they don't have the same number of reports or the same title, that they're losing something. But I found that I gained a lot in reporting to the mayor and the city manager. I got to interact with all sorts of high level dignitaries and visiting people that I wouldn't have if I had stayed, in consulting. And so I then over time got more direct reports, and then I had less direct reports, and then I got more direct reports, so
yeah.
I then took all of those skills to each of those different moves and was able to, even if I had less direct reports, I also would have big matrixed teams. So like where people report to somebody else, but I have like a big team of people. So in my current role, I have like 35 to 40 people that are deployed all across the organization, but that report to me in the sustainability management team. So they
Yeah.
get to work for me part of the time. And that team's really big.
Well, how did you decide on some of that? Because I've heard like a very similar story from someone else, right? And she was saying similar advice. But to people when they're facing that and they think they're, going to get a lesser title or lesser pay, or I used to be a lead or manage all these people, how has that helped you decide? Because it seems like you've done well with whatever decision matrix or criteria you've picked. But, someone out there that's like, no, I had this and I had the office and I had the title and the people. And how would they decide, or what advice would you give them?
So for me, I think I focus more on what impact I can make. And it's like when I went to the city, getting to work to pass ordinances with city council, to liaison with all these community groups and be a bridge to help them like influence how government works. I determined that was an equal or bigger impact on my passion around sustainability and the environment than just doing a few small projects and having a few people report to me. So my metric has always been impact, and how can my effort be the best impact, not necessarily just number of direct reports. And I've taken like people that have reported to you like, oh, well, don't you want to then be so-and-so's role? And I think, is that going to have more impact or less impact? Am I going to get more bogged down in like administrative kind of silly stuff, or am I going to have greater impact? So that's what I would say for me. It's always been impact.
Yeah, that's good, because you are chasing a higher value where it's not like the short term is like, maybe it is a different title, or I'm going to lose, this power I had over people. But I like that, because I think the problem is title or salary, right? Those are kind of the wrong things to chase. Yeah.
Oh, in fact, you're a financial person. So when I left consulting and went to the city, I did take a pay cut.
Wow.
Yeah. But I had this feeling that the experience of being inside the city and getting to have one of these very, very few roles at the time that were sustainability coordinators in cities, that would be really valuable. And I would learn things I wouldn't be able to learn unless I was like the in-house person. And so when I went to the national labs, I regained all the salary. And they asked what your offering your minimum salary was. And I put a number down that was like what I would have been if I had stayed in consulting. And I got that number.
Oh, interesting. See, over the long term, it all worked out. But it's funny. It's the short term. It's that ego that's like, oh, I don't want to go down. I don't want to lose this.
Yeah. I would have never been able to get that experience if I hadn't been thinking about more, what kind of impact can I make and how will this help like a long-term ability for me to be valuable in this space. So yeah, I regained the salary when I got back to the national labs, because it's more like a private sector salary than the way the city salaries work.
Yeah, and see, that's how I think it turns out for most people. If they're chasing the right things, have the right values in front of them. So what are some of the differences, or did you ever have any struggles, especially maybe as a newer leader, differences between managing people versus just doing the technical work?
Yeah, so one thing that was really challenging is I was peers with somebody, and then I had a team of people, like 4 or 5 people. And then I got promoted and I basically got to take over another team and also have that team underneath me. And so a person who had been my friend then became someone who reported to me. Yeah. And it was hard because then that person had some challenges and had some performance issues. And so then I had to be, following the process, having to go through the different steps. And I felt like more emotionally, like maybe sad. I don't know if that's the right word. It was harder because torn. Yeah, because we had been like friends, and we would, do coffee breaks, and we used to go to this workout gym at lunchtime, and so it felt a lot harder because I felt like I knew this person a lot better because we had spent hours talking about families and kids and careers, and like I had all this different insight because I was more their friend, their peer, but I also, when we had those challenges, I used that a little bit of like the empathy of, this is a really good person. This thing is really challenging right now, but I'm not going to give up on them. And I think we can get through this. We just have to kind of like when you discipline anybody, they can come back, but they have to understand the expectations. So we were able to get through it. But I had to seek, like, we have an ombudsman, it's called, at that job, where it's like an independent person that's not in HR, but they are like a third-party person you can go to and ask for advice. They can help do kind of coaching. They can do mediation. Like if you and a colleague or...
I've never had this at a company. This sounds cool.
Ombuds. It's actually a thing you can look up. I think ombuds or ombudsman, but ombuds is like
Okay.
the gender neutral. Ombuds. It's like an employee advocate, but that also has the ability to, it's not like an outsourced like employee assistance program. It's like an in-house thing.
Oh,
And our lab director had hired this person to help, like to improve culture by being another person outside of your line management that you could get advice and support from, and connect you to resources, and also kind of like be aware of the trends in the organization. And then if certain things were bubbling up, they could then go to the senior leadership and say, I've had a lot of consult on people, talking in negative tones or saying inappropriate things in the workplace. Like, we need to do something about that because it's a broader theme. That person could more confidentially see themes and stuff. So that was a person that I went to see, like, hey, I have this employee, and
that's incredible.
Yeah.
Instead of going
Ombuds.
to HR, I mean,
Yeah.
I disdain going to HR more than
Yeah.
anything else.
Ombuds is a brilliant thing. And then at Argonne, it was a gentleman. He was lovely, and he would keep metrics on like how many people he like talked to a month or a year, and it was phenomenal how many people. It's totally confidential. And he could sometimes also go and say like, oh, hey, Sandra, like Catherine came to see me, and she said it was okay for me to talk to you because she's feeling stressed out about XYZ.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to meet with us in a mediation? And so like he would then bring the two people together and help them like talk it out.
Oh, interesting. So I'm just curious in the story. I don't know if the person's listening, but were they resentful of you when they had to work under you, or were they okay with it?
No, we have a very different function, so it wasn't like that was resentful. But I do think, because once I became their manager, it wasn't quite as appropriate. My opinion had been it wasn't quite appropriate to do some of the same things that we'd been doing. Because like sometimes we would like, I don't want to say like talk trash, but we would talk about what's going on in our
about work. And then how can you do that? Yes, I know.
So I think if anything, it was more resentment or sadness over losing that part of our like work friendship that I think just had to change. But the issue that this person had nothing to do with that. It was more just, it was hard because it had been someone that I was very much more close with. And I had to say, look, you broke this policy, and here's the policy. And now we have to do it was like a safety thing. There was like a safety infraction. So I had to nobody got hurt, but it was one of those like, we have rules about doing things safely, and this wasn't safe, and now we have to do the next steps. And they were resentful. They didn't like the fact that I was saying that they were being unsafe, and they thought that, and it's not that bad, Catherine. And I was like, yeah. So I had to be the kind of bad cop.
Interesting. Well, I'm glad it all turned out. And that ombudsman, that sounds really interesting to have another person. Yes. Like a third party, a neutral, help coach you kind of through a difficult situation.
Yeah. It's a really cool, it was very impactful. And actually when I left that role, I went and did like a little exit meeting with them to just, thank them and kind of check in with them. It's a great kind of extra resource. So that's kind of the best example. I think mostly I just really enjoy being a people leader. And so but I also have learned, because I like to be really hands-on, I actually do better when I have less direct reports than more, because I like to be high touch.
You want to focus a lot on the people. Yes.
Yeah. And help upskill them and help support and give them as much, there's a minimum amount of face time that I think is acceptable, but also people who want more, who feel like they would, benefit from kind of more almost like peer programming. But like in my space, it's more of like talking through and strategizing how to handle a situation, because you're making change in organizations, right? And you're trying to like, how do I get people to like want to do this idea? Or we're getting pushback on this thing we're trying to roll out. Like, how do I handle that? So I would spend, a time like kind of coaching and mentoring more than just they're reporting in and making sure they're doing what they're supposed to do. So I found over time, I like when I have a reason, if I get too many direct reports, then I can't really do that as much.
Yeah, because if you think about it, not everyone's so maybe, I don't know, self-aware or understands the psychology of influence and persuasion. I think that takes a long time for some people to develop. Some people never are going to be good at it, right? And how do you guide people, right? And it's like, oh, this is a way you can get buy-in without, being a dictator or telling everyone they're wrong,
Yeah, absolutely. And whether there's a top-down like federal requirement, or your city has, bottoms up come up with some ambitious goal for sustainability, both of those things then require like driving change. So I just was talking to my team about John Kotter leading change and like our iceberg is melting model. Are you familiar with those at all?
No,
They're so great. So if you ever need to...
No, it sounds fascinating though.
I probably have my book over here somewhere. So there's an analogy of penguins and their iceberg is melting and they're trying to like motivate each other to like decide what to do. But John Kotter's model of the steps to change management really, kind of go through a process. And part of it is like having a compelling vision and then getting a sense of urgency so people feel motivated to want to make the change. And to me, that's the part that's the hardest, because if you actually don't get buy-in on that later in the process, when people are dragging their feet or they're like blocking you, because they never bought in.
Yeah. And, it's funny. Well, the reason I'm always so fascinated in that type of thing is for the finances, right? How do you get people to change their behavior towards their money? And before, when I wasn't the best coach, I would rush into the numbers and the budgeting and all the tips and tools. But I realized, like you're talking about, if people don't have a why or a reason, when it gets tough or when they're kind of dragging their feet on doing the things, and it takes a while to like understand and get to know them, why do they want to do this? Why are they motivated? Because change is hard, right? And and it's incredibly hard, and it helps you understand humans so much more, because it's not just, here's all the stuff and you can do it.
So do you find that there's like a couple common whys that people want to like get on top of their finances? Are they still really all over?
You know what's also kind of interesting? I used to also kind of just drive by it. But the thing is, people will sometimes tell you these whys that I think that they think maybe I want to hear. They're popular. They're like legacy planning, or there's nothing wrong with these. I'm not making fun of people, but they're like financial freedom. And it's like, okay, but what does that really mean? What does that mean to you? Like, you want to leave a legacy, or you want financial freedom? So they're using these like very big, broad terms, and it's just interesting because it doesn't always have to be these big, grand ideas. It could be, I want to take my entire extended family to Disney World one day. It could be like something like that. I think people think there's something selfish or shallow about, they say these other things. So I try to dig into it more, because sometimes I'm not sure people, I'm not saying they're lying. They might not know themselves, right? It's not that they're lying or misrepresenting, but they're like, yes, this is the grand reason why I want to do it. And then you're finding out later on, like, no, maybe it's because they want a partner in life. They want to be viable. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? And that could be their why, but it's just interesting. I don't think a lot of people dig into it themselves as much as, I'm not saying everybody should, but they don't think about it themselves. So they're telling you the reasons that they see or hear a lot about, right?
Yeah. So that is the benefit of when you have the advantage of saying and getting a group or a team or an organization to like come up with the goal, whatever it is, and then allowing everyone to sort of understand how their own little kind of personal preference can connect to the goals. Like in sometimes buildings, some people are like, I just want my bill to be lower. That's totally valid. Like there's tons of efficiency things you can do, make your bill lower. Some people want it to be more comfortable. I hate wearing a sweater all the time, or I hate how it's drafted. I hate how my feet are always cold. If I had better insulation, I would be more comfortable. So some people, you get them because they want to be comfortable. Some people, like where I work, also want it to be safe. And there's certain efficiency things, especially in like laboratories where you are controlling for chemicals and vapors. You need the right amount of ventilation to be safe, but you don't need more ventilation if it's not adding safety. That's wasteful.
Okay.
So you want to be able to feel confident that it's safe. And if you can prove that to them, then they're good. You can do other things as long as you're meeting the minimum safety. And then there's other people who really care about kind of the health of the planet and their next generation and their ability to still like go outside and enjoy nature and have predictable weather. And that's a different set of people. You can have one project, but there can be 5 different reasons why you do that project. And it's like getting each of your stakeholders to connect with at least one of the whys to be able to support the project.
I agree. Because you'll probably, if you don't probe deep enough, they're probably like, save the environment. Of course, that's our number one reason. It's like, yeah, but they're a business, they're a company.
Yeah. So that's why like figuring out what they're more about what's important to them. And then you can frame the language of the project to address the whys of the people that you have. But sometimes there's like 4 or 5 other angles of why you would justify it. And you got to know the people that are involved in the project.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that really is deep. It's kind of like coaching, psychology, understanding people, sales, to be honest. Yeah.
Sandra, I recently had someone say, oh, well, you don't know anything about sales because you've never worked in sales. And I was like, I never worked in sales. I've been an internal salesperson my whole, the last 15 years. I'm selling people all the time. My boss once told me, I'm so good at selling stuff, I could sell shoes to a snake. And I thought, shoes to a snake? That's so funny. He's like, but you make everything sound like it's good and needed and wanted. So I do a lot of sales, but it's not like I'm getting them to sign a contract per se. I'm getting them to buy in to the idea.
Oh, we're all in sales no matter what. It's funny. Engineers think they aren't, but we're always trying to sell an idea. We're always trying to get buy-in on the things that we want to do. People sell themselves in job interviews, to be frank.
I mean, you have to. And then if you're going to do a presentation or if you're doing a big proposal for like a big project and someone has to go and like convince the client to hire the cool team of expert people, you have to, sell that. I agree. I don't know why the dirty word, I don't want to be in sales or I don't do sales.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, you do. You're selling.
Yes, it's such a beneficial skill. But I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I was reading your 10 rules of sustainability, and it's very fascinating. Some of them, I'm reading them, and I don't know what they mean. So if you have time, I'd love for you to kind of go over them because I thought it was really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So these are things I'm still working on because I find that I have like this whole kind of behind the scenes thing that I'm doing. And I don't know that I necessarily tell people, what it is and why we're doing it like in this way. So so kind of my 10 from Catherine Hurley, just still developing in my senior but mid-career here, successful sustainability leadership, like principles. Like, how do you, be the change? So that first thing I mentioned is like compelling vision. It's important to set the stage of what it is and why it's important and get people to kind of be excited about being on your team or doing the thing that you're doing. And so you have to have kind of that, like the high level, like aspirational thing, right? That's number one. Then you need a team. I've had it where I've had no like direct reports and they're only, matrix team or community members. It's helpful if you actually have like people that really report to you that kind of have to do what you say, but you don't have to do it that way. And then if you were just trying to launch a project at your company, you can just recruit people in a matrix, but you got to have some kind of team. And then kind of having that anchor specific like project or initiative or first thing that you want to do, because your big vision is great. But if you can't say, okay, and then first step is we're going to install new lighting in, the cafeteria because everyone goes there all the time and it's going to be so much better for them. You have to have like an anchor. I did like a composting project once where people were really excited about that. It's something that people can get excited about and narrow in on. And then the fourth thing is you're getting into it. You're going to I've realized that we're not all experts in all things. So upskilling the team and helping people to continue to learn new skills. That's why I had a post about sustainability moments where we open up a team meeting with a one slide, one topic, like 5-minute little moment about some sustainability topic. And in the last 2 years, we've made like 50 of them. And they're on all different topics. And the person giving it gets to research something and then present that. So you got to keep upskilling. Fun. Yeah, it's great. And people practice their presentation skills. So keep upskilling and giving people the opportunity to research things. That's important. Another thing that is, I think, undervalued is I call it the independent action model. So Sandra, that's like, I'll meet a person who's not on my like matrix team, but they tell me, oh, Catherine, I love what you're doing and I'm so supportive of sustainability. And then I say, oh, great. Well, you know what? Why don't you just start infusing sustainability in your work area? And if you need any help, let me know. But I empower you to just start doing stuff that you see as low-hanging fruit. I'm giving them the okay to independently just do stuff that supports the broader good. They don't have to like be on a team or log their stuff. They can just independently do stuff that aligns with the big picture goal. That's what I call independent action model. And you can get a lot of people. It's almost like in a video game, like independent, like little agents that are out there, like kind of doing something in the background because they're on the blue team. So they're doing whatever the blue team is supposed to be doing. You're not controlling them, but you kind of given them you're on team blue. So do whatever the blue is supposed to do. It's like kind of like,
okay.
That's like called independent action model. And then I talked a little bit about stakeholder engagement, and there's a lot of different strategies. Some people really need the one-on-one, come meet with them separately. Other people love coming to the meeting. We can use virtual tools, but it's really important to get input from people so they feel included. The other kind of thing, once you get a project and you're sort of still getting ready to get into implementation, you have to get that good planning, but I call it kind of call. So maybe you don't have everything funded yet, or you only have like phase one or a pilot or a planning budget, and you need to get the senior people or the decision makers to say yes. So you look for an on-ramp or like an opening where you can like make your little plug, right? But you have to be ready with like the elevator pitch, all your details. So when the time is right, you can jump in there. Because if you were to meet an important person at your company and you don't have your crisp three bullets of what your points are, then you miss the window. So you got to be ready for that on ramp. And that's like an important aspect. And then that's also where the champions, there's going to be people that aren't on your team, but they're influential. And if John or Sue or, Betty likes your thing and they're out there saying, oh yeah, I support that project. You need to have champions that are not directly in the team, but they can be out there kind of laying the groundwork and helping people to say yes. And then kind of the last two things are all about like communication. So one of the things I always do when I start a sustainability job is I come in and I find out what are we doing really awesome that we can get recognized, get an outside award, do an inside award, get the senior executive to do a shout out. Like, how can we elevate the work by getting it better recognized? And in the beginning, when you don't have anything done yet, you have to just get like something existing, right? And that always works. And then once you get one award, it's easy to get more. And then people are like, oh, you're winning awards. Well, your thing must be so important. And then it's a flywheel. It's like the tipping point. You have to get momentum.
I like that.
You got to get awards. Just like personal things. You present at one conference and then you apply to present at another conference. And like, oh, well, she presented at that other conference. She must be good. She's
it's that ethos and that credibility you're trying to set right from the start. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then my last thing on like number 10, not in any particular order, is my personal philosophy is we have to meet each other where they're at. Maybe how you are similar with like financial, everyone's not going to be ready for step 10. We have to help people to like make incremental progress. And if you make them feel like they're not green enough, they're not efficient enough, they're not like willing to be bold enough, then they kind of give up. So I'm really big on wherever they're at, help them make that next step forward and not making people, I don't know what a good like catchy phrase is, but not make them feel like green shaming, like, oh, you're not good enough, so you can't
green
be in this
shame.
club.
I like that.
I just made that up.
You got to coin that now.
I'm writing that down. So maybe you realize about me, I'm like a very verbal thinker. I'm constantly thinking of things when I'm talking. Okay, green shaming.
Me too. But I've also heard the same phrase about meet people at where they're at, right? And it's not getting upset that they won't make it. And so I deal with the same with the finances too. There are people I'd love for them to have like super clean, very crisp finances and, 3 accounts and very simple, but then it's like baby steps, right? To get people to that.
Yeah. And if you think about it as being a marathon and there's incremental, like every mile you're making progress, then you can check off over time that you're getting there. But you don't want to not come to the start line because you're so overwhelmed by the magnitude and you don't feel like you're ever going to get there, or that, everyone else is like way in better shape than you are. It's just getting there.
Yeah.
Is better than your best excuse. That's what Hannah Corbin on Peloton says. You being here today is better than your best excuse. And no matter how you feel today, it's great that you're here. So that's like what I tell.
Well, as we close out, where do you think the future of sustainability and how is it going to be? There's a lot of things going on right now, obviously.
Yeah. So good news. The good news is there's so much work to be done. So, and I found, you kind of like joke spaghetti's on the wall and see what sticks. There's a lot of work to do. And often teams and organizations don't have the full resources to achieve the big goal. So when you find some blockade, sometimes it's about back to basics. What is easy to justify financially? What makes good business sense? What's helping to, increase, competition or being more competitive in the market, depending on where you're at. And so I think we're going to see a lot of investments in things that are for efficiency and resource conservation, because you're saving materials, you're saving money. I think there's a lot of talk right now about reminding people about conservation and nature solutions and connecting to the why of people who enjoy doing things outdoors, because there's a lot of conservation movement partly came from people who wanted to make sure that there was natural areas for people to enjoy. So we're going to see some return to themes of previous decades and generations that resonated and are a little more evergreen, I would say. And I think we're going to just see a lot of tripling down on local stuff. So one of the things I'm trying to is make more time to be involved in my local community, because I get so energized and there's so much to do at my work that then it's been hard for me in my entire career to be involved in community-based organizations when I wasn't like working at one. So I want to figure out how to make some time to be involved in my environmental commission or the green community group, because there's so much great stuff right in my local community. that is right in my back door that's doing great stuff. And people are, around the country can get involved in local actions, like think global, but act local. And that's a tagline from a nonprofit that I used to be a part of.
I really like that.
Yeah. It was like Citizens Greener Evanston, think global, act local. Because the idea was every individual action counts, but you're doing it in kind of concert with that independent action model of people, around the world. So lots more local action, while companies may have to focus on things that are ironclad on like a business perspective, but there's still tons of great work to get done. So we'll get work done where there are on-ramps and where there's support.
Okay. Well, I don't want to take any more of your time. Is there any last thoughts or things you want to say?
Well, I just want to thank you. I mean, first of all, it was so fun meeting at the conference, and you've been very inspirational to me on my journey to be more active in LinkedIn and be more engaged. And I love your comments about, it's not just how many people that are following you. It's like, quality, real engagement. And I've been finding that to be very valuable. And I'm also helping a couple people get jobs, and that's making me feel really fulfilled. And I think right now, if you have a job, it's a great opportunity to also help support other people who don't have jobs. So I'm going to continue to work on that. And I'm so glad we got a chance to chat today. This is so fun.
Yeah, thank you. And is it okay for people to reach out to you on LinkedIn or somewhere?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I have some contacts. So if you see you're looking at a job, or you see someone or a company and I have a connection, definitely reach out. I'm happy to meet with you and do introductions, because I think the new name of the game is making those, meaningful contacts and getting people who know you to recommend you. So yeah, I'm happy to help do that for other people.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. And I'm so glad we got to meet again. I'm excited to see everything that's going on in your future and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so glad we met.
Thank you.